Hi, my name is Sheena Kamal, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Sheena Kamal.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Author Stories. We really appreciate you listening. If you would like to subscribe to the show, over in the right-hand sidebar, there are some handy links where you can click and subscribe on your iPhone or your Google Android device, or listen online, or YouTube, or Stitcher Radio. Pretty much anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe to Author Stories there. We would like to thank our sponsors today for sponsoring the show. It's because of their generous support that we're able to bring you so many great author interviews, and we'll be calling out those sponsors throughout the show. So thank you to them. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from our good friend Richard Gleaves. Thank you so much for listening. Now on to our show. He enlisted for the money. He stayed for the girl. Gateway to the Galaxy, the new series everyone is talking about, beginning with Book 1, Into the Breach. Frank and Marine Space Corps 1 find themselves across the galaxy in a WWE smackdown with the legions of a boss-level villain. But the party's just getting started. He donned the mantle of a celestial knight to impress a girl? Well, an empress. Now destiny's calling in a debt. A lightning-paced military fantasy full of outlandish comedy and impossible situations that will have you hailing for these Marines from the get-go. For fans of Green Lantern and the Stargate universe. Listen to what some readers are saying. This is good stuff. Thanks for the new obsession. I recommend and can't wait for the next book. And the visual pictures and action are amazing. They're getting the band back together. And this time, it's serious nonsense. Pick up the Gateway to the Galaxy series by Jonathan Yanez and J.R. Castle, available now on Amazon.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. Gateway to the Galaxy. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Sheena Kamal on the show with me today. Sheena returns. She was on the show last August and talking about her brand new book, The Lost Ones, and we had a great conversation. And I've been following Sheena on Instagram over this last year and watching the progress of the new book, and getting excited when we see a post that she's finishing the manuscript and turning it in and then working on edits, and it's such a cool thing to watch. So I invited Sheena to come back on the show to talk about a lot of great news that she's got going on. A new book, the paperback of The Lost Ones coming out, and a short story, a novella that bridges the two. Welcome back to the show, Sheena.
Thank you so much, Hank, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you. We had such a great time last time, and I was listening back to it, and I got excited about The Lost Ones all over again, and I said, man, I'm going to have to go back and reread this book now. But what's been happening with you over the last year? You've had a pretty whirlwind year, haven't you?
Yes. It's been really crazy. Just a lot of writing, and I mean, some of it is the suspense series, the Nora Watts series, and some of it has been more personal writing, and just sort of hearing the reviews and getting feedback has been just a wonderful part of the experience for me. And then award nominations have been coming in, and that's been blowing my mind.
It's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I hadn't anticipated this kind of reception, and so, not that I didn't believe in the book or anything, but it just seems so out there, right? And there's so many books out, so that people have been reading mine and have felt so strongly about it has been just, I'm really grateful for all the support that I've been receiving.
Well, when we last talked, the Lost Ones had only been out, let's see, just a few weeks when we talked last time. So not really enough time to really tell how the book was being received. It was getting great reviews and all of that. But in the subsequent months, the book just kind of took on a life of its own. Did you have any idea that the book was going to be as well received as it was? And as a first time novelist, what did that do for your confidence? And was it scary having to follow that book up?
Those are a lot of questions.
20 questions at once. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I had no idea that it would be received like this, and you never know, right? So really, I wrote it in obscurity. I had never written a novel before. I didn't know how to write a novel, so when I wrote it, it was just kind of like a grand experiment, let's just say. And I wanted, I just had the story in me, and it had to get out somehow. And so I really didn't know that anybody would like it. Nobody was waiting for it, and I had no agent or anything like that. So it was it was just kind of coming out of the blue here for me when it was released, and to get the reviews that I have gotten and the blurbs that I've gotten has been quite the experience. I have to say, like, I try not to think about it too much, just because I do have writing to still do. So if you linger in a place of like, look at my great reviews and look at what this person said, and then it's hard to face the blank page the next day. So I've been trying to balance that, right? That's been kind of a tough balance for me to figure out how to accept all these nice things and then push them aside and continue.
Well, I've heard people say before that it's equally dangerous to believe all of your 5-star reviews and your 1-star reviews. But because when the 1-star reviews will drive you over a cliff if you let them. But too much of the flowery praise makes it difficult to sit down and do the work again. You need to come back to a new project like it's a new project, like you have nothing, no goodwill built up at all, and just do the art all over again. And it's kind of a scary place, isn't it?
It is. The 5-star reviews I try not to pay too much attention to, just because when I read what I think every little part of my brain says, am I a genius? Am I like super, super talented? Because like, where's all of my money and acclaim? Give me more. But the 1-star reviews also are just, I don't know, you just are plunged into this pit of despair. So yeah, you're right. Like, I try to keep on an even keel, and I actually don't really celebrate anything. So that's my problem. Like, I'm supposed to. Well, I was thinking about having a book launch for It All Falls Down, which is the Lost One sequel, and that comes out July 3rd. And I just I can't get into this idea of celebrating a thing at this time. I don't know. Is that strange? Like, do the other authors that you have on your show, do they have the same problem with celebrating?
Oh yeah. I think that's a pretty common feeling that the entire thing, the whole business, the whole, we get to make up stories for a living, like that. That's so surreal, and then to celebrate something that most people would dream of getting to do is just a little bizarre, but that all comes with it. So. You told us last time this really fascinating story of speed dating agents and writing this book when your words that you said you had no idea what you were doing, and it turned out pretty well. The Lost Ones. A lot of people have loved that book. When you go to start a new project, like the new book or the novella that you wrote, you've got your characters already built. You've got Nora Watts and a lot of kind of the world building done from book one. Is it like starting over from scratch, or is the follow up? Are you able to get into the story a little easier because you do have some things already determined? Kind of what's the process like for getting the next project started?
Yeah, well, I have to say I still have no idea what I'm doing. That has not changed. I just know that, every day I wake up, first thing, open my laptop, have some coffee, and start afresh. And nothing that I've planned or tried to do the day before really makes any sense. So I try not to think about it too much. Writing is just a thing that I try not to overthink it. And so getting into the novella and the second book, they were easier in the sense that I already kind of had those characters and, like you mentioned, a world built, but then you have to do different things with the characters and the world. So I find it to be a lot more complicated because a reader may just read the second book or read the novella or read the third, and people may not start at the beginning of the series, so you kind of have to find a way to make it fresh, but also stay true to what you've already created. And so that requires a bit of a balancing act that I'm still sort of trying to figure out as I go along.
Your books are these great suspense thrillers, crime thrillers, you might say. I know that you spent some time working as an investigative journalism researcher in for film and television. And is that where the love of these kinds of stories comes from? What is it inside you that loves these kinds of stories?
Well, I have to say that I don't only write crime fiction. I think it was just this one particular character and story that I started with just happened to have been in that sort of crime drama world. And it's probably because I was a researcher at the time. And so it just sort of happened organically, and it came out of this character and this sort of premise. And so it had to be suspense because that's just, it called for it. And I think really what I love about crime fiction, and I have grown to love it as a genre, it delves into social issues, very present day issues, in a way that really speaks to me because the plots move. You don't feel like you're necessarily being hit over the head with a political treatise of sorts. You're actually sort of, you go into a world and you go in running with these kinds of books. And I find that once you wrap issues around entertainment and really try to make it about the entertainment, then you do end up absorbing issues. And I actually, things that I've been really passionate about in my life, such as, gender equality, violence against women, poverty, income inequality, I'm able to myself process some of these issues through my writing and learn and grow and hopefully make entertaining stories that are relevant to this world today.
Well, the genre itself is extremely hot right now, and I think that for readers, especially the ability to sit and read a story that is so bizarre and so deals with the basest of human traits and attitudes, and then to see that some justice come out of that, or see a character grow out of that, but in the safe space of our home, or listening to the audiobook in the car or whatever. I think that helps us to come to grips with some of these. I know as a writer that it can be a cathartic experience to write those things, but for the reader as well. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And I think maybe you've hit on what is so great about the crime fiction genre is that in real life we don't get closure, but in our stories we can search for things like justice and redemption, and find them in some way at the end. Because in real life, like it's too messy for that, right? Not many people do get that justice and do get that redemption, but at least in fiction, we can maybe explore how that is possible.
Right. And the world we live in today is absolutely crazy. And being in control of something for a little while is a great way to deal with that, I think.
Yes, I have no idea. I have no words for the world today. I legitimately am just like every on the minute there's something new that you're just like, what is going on? I thought I knew something, but I understand nothing anymore.
Yeah, when you have to look to see if you're actually watching CNN or HBO, because it's just the world has gone mad.
I mean, how do we write fiction? How do we write?
I know when reality is this weird, how do you write novels?
Exactly.
Oh man, I love it. So the book that came out last year, The Lost Ones, is going into paperback now, and that's a big accomplishment for a debut author. The hardback has sold so well it's going into paperback, and then right on the heels of that is the brand new novel It All Falls Down coming out. But you've got this novella that you put out between the two. It came out in May. What was the idea for writing the novella, and would you talk a little bit about the difference in writing the shorter work as opposed to the longer novel? Was that process different for you, and was it as much fun to write?
Well, it was more fun to write because it was shorter. So it was really just a little taste of something, just a little case, and I got to play around a little bit and just be more experimental. Because it's like the difference between a feature film and a short film, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like a feature film's got to hit the beats and all those things, but a short film can just be a little snippet and you can kind of do crazy things with it. So that was the difference really for me with the novella. And the reason I wrote it was just I was asked to consider, is there a shorter story in there that I might be willing to expand on? And what had happened was that there's a gap between the first and the second book in terms of time frame in the story. So it's about a year and a half, I think, in between the two. And in that year and a half, we pick up with my main character, Norah, somewhere different. And so the novella really gave me a chance to fill in some of what had happened and to set the stage for the second book.
Gotcha. Whose idea was it for the novella? Was it yours or your publisher?
My publishers, yeah.
That's really interesting to see publishers embracing some different mediums, and that's really cool because short fiction has kind of been in this weird place for a while that we used to have great journals and magazines that published a lot of short fiction, and you could make a living writing those and publishing there, but that's not quite so much a thing anymore. But with the digital revolution and Kindles and Nooks and all of those devices, iPads, there's a real resurgence in short fiction and people being able to get things between projects, and I love seeing that.
Well, the thing with short fiction that strikes me is that people want it for free. And so it's not that there's not been a need for it, but people just want the content, and just they want it accessible right away, and they want to not pay for it. And so it's always been around, I think. But now, perhaps in my case, I noticed that it's about world building, and really, trying to build a fan base and to show people you know what, you don't necessarily have to read these huge tomes of novels. You can kind of get in, get out, and have a story. And if you like it, then you can kind of delve into the world more with the more intense books. But I think it plays to different ideas, right? Because readers, want all sorts of things. You never know what those people want in life. Like they can want, longer novels. They can want the little stuff. Readers are they're experimental, and I think that maybe this short fiction is trying to tap into that the ephemeral nature of what readers can be these days.
And it's a great medium for, like you said, for building the audience and things like that. I love to just see authors and publishers try new things, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but we have this great skill of writing and getting to that lends, getting to meet people and build that audience, and so I'm happy to see that at least we're trying new things.
Well, I found that, like, my publishers at William Morrow, they are really open to ideas and they're very supportive. And I know a lot of authors who don't love their publishers, but I kind of really love mine just because they do seem really open and fun to work with and experimental. So that's been a wonderful experience for me as a debut author, and hopefully to your listeners out there, it doesn't have to be this, great, big, scary, looming publisher. They are people who are wonderful to work with.
Yeah.
And they have been for me.
And they did what? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no. They have been for me, like, just really wonderful to work with.
Well, and that's something we lose sight of so easily. We think of these big corporations and things, but we're talking about people, and they got into the business because they love books as much as we do. And, we can argue about, how publishing is changing and, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever, but, everybody gets into it because they love books, they love telling stories, and they love being part of the process. And when you're dealing with those people, good stuff is bound to come out.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and this even goes back to the agent thing. When I was pitching to agents, a lot of writers were just terrified of meeting an agent, of having to pitch, but really, I found that for me, it was a lot easier, maybe because I came from a film background and you kind of always had to be pitching yourself. Right. But it was important to remember that agents are just people as well. Like, they love books. They want to be excited about you and your project, and publishers too. Like, they want you. They want you, basically. They want you to blow them away and to be part of their community.
Right. At the end of the first book, Did you know that Nora was going to be a recurring character? Did she tell you, Sheena, I've got more stories to tell? I know you wrote the novella and now the new novel, but how confident were you in Nora that you could keep continuing her story?
I was very confident because that's what I told my agent, and she got me a 3-book deal. So
that's the best answer. Yeah.
So that's what happened. But really, like, I when I finished the book, let's say I finished the first draft of the book and I went to pitch to agents, I in the back of my mind, I had an idea that I can continue it, but it wasn't like, I'm going to plan 3 books. It was really just, my agent was in the midst of talking to publishers, and one day she sent me an email and she was like, do you see this as a series? And I said, well, maybe a trilogy. She was like, well, give me a little paragraph of what you envision the other books as. And I was at the mall, so I literally sat there at the mall, and within, I don't know, I would say 20 minutes or so, just sent a couple paragraphs off, and that's what happened.
Oh, I love it. I love hearing that so much. So take us, if you will, through the events of the where the last book ended. The novella finds us in the Pacific Northwest with this really weird situation, and then the new book, It All Falls Down. I think we're back to Detroit, aren't we?
Yes, we're back to Vancouver, and then Nora goes searching the truth about her father's life and his death, because what she knew is that he committed suicide when she was a child, and he'd grown up in Detroit. So I have her go to Detroit to look for information about her father, who was the only parent that she knew, and someone had shown up at the beginning of the second book who cast doubt on his suicide, on the circumstances around his death. So she goes there really to search for clues about her own past and her heritage, and then she gets into a whole gang of trouble there.
Gotcha. So when what emotional state did we find Nora in at the beginning of the new book? The first book was such a roller coaster ride. How are you growing Nora emotionally through this process?
Ooh, that's a good question. Nora, the first book, she is a person who has had some traumatic experiences and hadn't healed. So it's this time in her life that she's now starting to open herself up emotionally and trying to heal and trying to also solve mysteries and being a bit of a crime fighter in her own way. So really it's about taking this person who's very closed and mistrustful and having people come into her life who show her a different side of things. And also, she's got a daughter that she knows now because of the first book. So there's a mother-daughter relationship there that I use to try to expand her as a person and to show how she can grow and how difficult that is, because she's a character who doesn't really have a stable family life. There are a lot of people out there who don't have a stable family life. So what is their journey like? And that's how I try to keep that emotional core for her.
Your books have a thread of melancholy through them. I think I've heard it described, and that really resonated with me when I read that. That there is this thread of loss, this thread of that borders on despair, but doesn't wholly give into it. And this, and of course, we've got the kind of the grisly nature of just the situations that Nora finds herself in, and the things that make it the genre. Yet, like we talked about earlier, we do get to see some closure, and we get to see some justice served, and we find out that the world is not all lost. How do you balance those things in your writing, where you make heartbreakingly real characters and really put them through the emotional paces, while leaving that ray of hope through that has to be a tough juggling act as a writer, I would think.
Yeah. I think that, I'm not sure exactly how I manage it. I know that and if I do manage it, I mean, I try for it. I really, to me, this is what crime fiction is capable of, and it's capable of just about anything, really. And that's what I love about the genre. But for me, the idea of melancholy, of it being an emotional journey, that's really important for me to try to inject. And it has to do with this character that I'd created without really having any idea of what I was doing when I created her. Like, I didn't really know what she was capable of until I started writing her. And I'm still learning how to work with somebody who has such emotional depths. And maybe it goes back to the fact that I'd made her a blues singer. She's a former blues singer, and I don't know, there's just something about me that just is drawn towards artists, because their emotional life and their imagination is so involved and so deep, and you can lose yourself in the emotional life of an artist. So I really wanted, I guess, to explore that, and I think maybe that's how I balance it, is to keep that emotion, keep that depth and all of her colors alive as I try to move her from one place to another. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Am I going crazy?
No, absolutely. And I you made me think of this. is that artists a lot of times are breathing, walking contradictions. A lot of stand-up comics are actually, depressive people, and a lot of horror writers and mystery suspense writers. You would think have the most twisted minds, and they're just the sweetest people in the world. It's this weird thing that artists have. We're just walking contradictions, and I think you really nailed it there, talking about making Nora, a blues singer, and she's in touch with this very emotional side, yet then has to be very clinical in her work, but allowing her to move back and forth in those things. I think I think you absolutely nailed it.
Well, this is kind of a crazy story. I went to Rome last year. I think shortly after I spoke with you, in that late August period.
Yeah.
I needed to be in a city where I didn't speak the language, but was sort of a bustling metropolis of sorts. So I hit on Rome. I went to Rome, and it was just going to be me trying to write Nora's third book. That's what I was working on at that time, but also just giving myself a little bit of a break because mentally, I was having some anxiety issues. So I went off to Rome, and I wrote another book, not the third Nora Watts book, but I wrote a YA novel. Nice. It was crazy how that happened. It was it's about a young Muay Thai fighter of Trinidadian heritage who starts to suspect that her mother killed her father, and that the other women in her life were in on it, and that they're planning on killing another man. So it's just this crazy sort of magic realism kind of YA novel, because it delves into Caribbean mythology a little bit, but also looks at the connection between domestic violence and violence through sport. And I don't know how I got there, how it really felt very present to me. And in about a week, I had the bones of the book, and then it took me another few weeks to finish it off and send it. And now it's being published by Penguin Random House sometime next year, I think.
I love it. Yeah. When is that coming out?
Sometime next year, I believe.
Oh, so awesome. So awesome. You are a Muay Thai fighter yourself, aren't you?
Well, I've trained. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a Muay Thai fighter, just because those. Yeah, they're pretty serious about it. But I trained at a Muay Thai gym for about 10 years, on and off. My best friend from high school, and this is in the East End of Toronto, he opened a gym there in this area that's kind of like a very mixed immigrant community, and the gym has always been a safe space. It's always been just this wonderful place where people can kind of just go and get some stress relief through the training, but also just hang out and relax. And so it was really a wonderful experience for me to just be in that gym. So I would hang out there all the time and train a little bit. But I was one of those, the gym rats who, they're not good. They're not serious.
But they live there.
They pretty much lived there. Yeah. So I was kind of one of those, and I do love to train, and I'm not terrible or anything, but I was definitely not one of the more serious ones. I would just like to go and shoot the shit and and hang out with people, and it was my happy place, basically.
I love it. I also love that idea of going to Rome and being in a place that's super busy and bustling, but you don't speak the language, and then you wind up writing a book about a Trinidadian, because that's the natural thing that would come out of Rome, right?
So crazy. I don't understand myself often. I'm a stranger to myself in this way. But yeah, it just, for some reason, travel really inspires me to write, and so I get restless a lot, and whatever reason, that's the story that was kind of in my mind in Rome, which makes no sense. It's very confusing.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to make sense. The whole idea of sitting down and creating whole stories out of nothing, and then people spending their money to buy. None of that makes sense. We're just lucky to get to do it. And whatever the process is, then more power to you.
Yeah, maybe I just have to go to Rome more often. Perhaps.
Right. I think it's just make it a yearly pilgrimage and just see what comes out.
Yes, I shall become.
The problem is you'll eventually learn the language if you spend enough time there, and then it won't work anymore.
I try to learn and nothing. No, that's not true.
You just have to spin the globe and pick another random place to go to next. But,
well, yeah, the It All Falls Down, which is coming out July 3rd.
Yes.
That book I mostly wrote in Detroit, New York, and Southeast Asia.
Nice.
For some reason, I just I couldn't handle Vancouver. Vancouver's a very difficult place to live in. It's kind of a resort town, so it's very expensive, and people say it has no soul, which is not true. But sometimes you actually do feel that way about it. And so I needed to kind of get out of here, and so that book I mostly wrote it on the road.
Vancouver is also really turned into kind of Hollywood North, haven't they?
Yes.
Isn't there a lot of TV production and stuff that goes on up there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which probably adds to the vibe of there's too many creative people here and too much make believe going on here. I need to go somewhere real.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the creative aspect of the film and TV industry having such a huge presence in Vancouver is a good thing, because what it has become is a resort town for very wealthy people, and so property values are just way sky high, and so the artists of the city are being pushed out. So to have the industry here is actually good, because it gives people who don't really make that much money opportunities to be in the arts and be creative and make a living off of the film and TV industry in Vancouver. It gives them the opportunity to pay their rent, I suppose.
Right. Well, Sheena, the new book, like we mentioned earlier, the first book is out in paperback June 28th. So when people are hearing this, they can go grab that right now. It's available. And if you haven't gotten the Lost Ones in hardback, you can get it in paperback now. I highly recommend it. The novella is out. It's been out since the spring. And now we've got It All Falls Down Book 2. Out just a week from now when people are hearing this. You're wrapping up or have you already wrapped up book 3 in the trilogy?
It's there's a first draft down, but it's got to go through. That's just the beginning, really. Like, right. The first draft is just your beginning.
What's it going to be like leaving Nora Watts after this trilogy, or do you think her stories will carry on?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm done with her yet, but whether or not I continue depends on a lot of other factors. But it's all about keeping the emotional core of the journey. So if I'm not able to have that emotional kind of grounding, then I won't continue. But if I find some sort of way to keep it as resonant as I can and as compelling as I can in terms of her character and her journey, then I will absolutely continue. So it's there's a lot of other factors at play as to whether or not I'm going to continue with it, but it's not unthinkable.
Excellent. Well, folks, we highly recommend all of the books in the Nora Watts series. There's going to be links to the new book, the new paperback, the novella, all of that in the show notes at hankgarner.com. You can find everything there. Sheena, where can people follow you if they want to, dig into your work and follow along and make sure that they know about the YA book that's coming out next year and all the good stuff going on with you?
Okay, I have to admit that I am terrible at social media. Like, I'm really, really bad. But I do make an attempt, like a misguided attempt at Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at Sheena Kamal Writes, and I do my very best on that one.
Excellent. Sheena, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me, Hank. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
No use crying over spilled milk. Eliza hated that cliché. She'd grown up a cliché, her life a bowl of cherries, duck soup, easy as pie, child's play behind a white picket fence. Mother had been the Wyatt Earp of clichés, firing them off quick draw. A rotten apple spoils the barrel. Smile and the world smiles with you. Every dog has his day. Children should be seen and not heard. She believed them all, particularly this last. Eliza obliged, preferring to wander the streets of Wytheville, Virginia, on her own lonesome terms. The divorce left Laura a spinster librarian, and one false step on icy stairs left her an invalid as well. The accident happened on New Year's Eve, 1950. Laura had just locked the doors of Wytheville Public Library. We must make black-eyed peas tomorrow, Laura had been thinking, with turnip greens. That ensured a lucky new year, and if you swept some money over your threshold, a prosperous one, too. She loved those old Southern traditions. She looked both ways, checking for Negroes, but turned to heel on the icy marble of the stairs and fell into the bushes below, breaking the long bones in both legs. Eliza had taken advantage of her mother's absence. She'd lost her virginity that same night. She'd swept Ron Partridge over her threshold, initiating her own beloved tradition. She was nursing a hangover, giddily reliving the event. But around 8:30 she realized that her mother had not come down to breakfast. She checked her mother's bedroom, found it empty, took the bus down to the library, climbed the high stairs, knocked hard on the library doors, and heard a groan below. Laura lay under the William Penn barberry bushes, below the yellow-trimmed windows of the non-fiction section. Her white stockings ran Jezebel red with blood. Sweat and melted snow had soaked her blouse, and her gray forehead blazed. The broken bones didn't kill Laura Merrick. She lay in the hospital, wheezing, her legs mortared up in casts. She had few visitors after the first week. Her church group was glad to fret over a poor thing for a day or two, but they trickled away when Laura had the bad manners to linger. On Valentine's Day, as her mother slept, Eliza drew big, sloppy hearts on her casts. Laura harumphed when she woke and insisted on keeping her legs hidden beneath blankets afterwards. But in late March, something miraculous happened. Laura's self-control dropped. She ranted at nurses, spit at doctors, swore like a Navy pilot dropping F-bombs on Hiroshima. She had dementia, the doctors said. Eliza decided that her mother had just stopped believing her own bullshit. The spells continued over the next 2 weeks, and Eliza enjoyed her mother's company for the first time. They swapped bawdy jokes, ogled the handsome interns, and chattered like best girlfriends late into the evening. They had long conversations, and Laura spoke her own mind in her own words about things that mattered to her. It broke Eliza's heart when the prim, condescending librarian returned. Laura hardly acknowledged anything that had passed between them. The clichés returned. You can't have your cake and eat it too. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Nothing is certain except death and taxes. This last proved true. On April 15th, Laura Merrick marked her Bible with a tongue depressor, set it on her nightstand, leaned back against the headboard, and coughed blood down the front of her nightdress. Eliza found her that way, dead as the proverbial doornail, and yes, the blood was thicker than water, just as her mother had always said. Much thicker than water, in fact, perhaps as thick as molasses in January.